go to you, Mr. Brown. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. What are you hoping for from this emergency summit?
Good morning, Kate. Well, we have a plan and we get the vaccines out to those people who need them. So only 2% of Africa vaccinated, only 2% of low-income countries. It's in our interest in Britain that they are vaccinated because the disease will spread in Africa, it will mutate and there'll be new variants. It will come back to haunt even the fully vaccinated in Britain unless we take action. So we've been stockpiling vaccines. We've got a mountain of vaccines in America and in Europe. They're not going to be used even when we do the boosters and the 12 to 15-year-olds. There are still millions of vaccines left over and we've got to get them to the rest of the world. Otherwise, they're going to pass their use-by date and expire and be of no use to anybody. And all of us hate waste.
So I don't understand why it's not as easy as opening up the belly of a British Airways jet, putting them on board and taking them down to Joburg.
Well, you've done charity work in Africa, Kay, and you know that there's a desperate need to get the vaccines into Africa as quickly as possible, and that's what should be being done. And so in June, they had a plan that they would give dose share, as they called it. When they had excess vaccines, they'd pass them over, but it hasn't really happened enough, and yet there's all these vaccines lying in warehouses or on contract for delivery to Britain, America and Europe, and yet we don't need them. So we've got to get them out as quickly as possible. Wednesday's summit should agree a plan, and it's in everybody's interest, our interest, to protect ourselves as well as to help people in other countries.
Do you have a plan? Do you know how we should do it?
Yep, my plan is that this month we could transfer 300 million vaccines. That's from America and Europe. By next month, there could be 500 million, and by December, 1 billion. And so we need to get all the resources at our disposal to airlift them, to get them out to the countries that need them, get the vaccinations happening, and provide some support. As you know, Kay, from your visits to Africa, we need to give help to administer the vaccines as well. But that's something we've also put in train. And I've been working with the World Health Organization and other organizations to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Do we have enough people? Because that was going to be my next point. You know, we're struggling as far as the NHS is concerned here. We haven't got any people that we can send to put these jabs in people's arms. So what do? We get the vaccines there. They're all there on the runway. Then what do we do with them?
Well, there's hundreds of thousands of health workers in the low-income countries and across Africa. They've not even been vaccinated yet. You know, to vaccinate all the health workers is a huge task. So that's got to happen quickly. Because they're risking their lives to save lives. Then we get to the vulnerable elderly, and then we get to the rest of the population so that Africa and low-income countries can also go back to work. They're suffering because massive unemployment as well as massive poverty as a result of this. I fear that unless we take this action, then Africa could become the centre for COVID. And if in future you have new variants and mutations coming out of Africa, then it really will hurt the rest of the world. So it's in Africa's interest, it's in our interest. Yes, you can devise a plan very quickly. And Wednesday's summit, they shouldn't go around the table saying, congratulating themselves on what they're doing. They should go around the table and say, let's get a plan and let's get all these surplus vaccines out there and get them used. Because as I say, what I hate most of all about this is waste. Because we've got genius of scientists, we've got the manufacturers delivering 1.5 billion vaccines a month, and then they're lying in warehouses and not being used. That's not good enough. And we in Britain and people in America and Europe have got to get their vaccines out to people who need them.
As you say, and has often been quoted as saying, nobody's safe unless everybody's safe. One wonders why all of these vaccines are going to waste. We seem to have stalled here in the United Kingdom in making sure that people are double vaccinated. I was looking at the figures this morning. Less than 2/3 of the British public have been fully vaccinated. We used to lead Europe, and now we're something like 7th, 8th, Portugal, Spain, lots of other European countries ahead of us. What's happened?
Well, in America and in Europe, as well as in Britain, there is resistance among some people to vaccinate. And I want to appeal to everybody who's not been vaccinated to get vaccinated. And that helps them, it helps their families, it helps protect our communities. So there is some resistance and we've got to deal with that. But even if we set aside enough vaccines for all who need them and haven't asked for them yet, and do the boosters, and do 3 million 12 to 15-year-olds and get them vaccinated twice, which is 6 million vaccinations, we still have millions of vaccines left over. And by Christmas, that will be 100 million. If we don't airlift them to Africa and elsewhere, it could be 200 million because of the delays in getting them to people, and that is an excess above all the other vaccinations that we still want to see happen in the United Kingdom.
What do you think of these anti-vaxxers with their bullhorns who wander around shopping centres on a Saturday intimidating people and saying that it's a government ploy to try and tag us all?
Well, look, I admire those people who are not in politics and not really in public life in the political sphere, who've gone out and said, as individuals like Gareth Southgate, get vaccinated. And I think we need role models to appeal to young people and to the rest of the community not to listen to these anti-vaxxers, because already we have proved that 100,000 lives have been saved in Britain as a result of vaccination. And if you think ahead to the next year, the estimate is that 1 million deaths will happen across the world unless we get vaccinations to people. And that's a huge figure of wasted lives as a result of having wasted vaccines. And so we really have to act to persuade people to get the vaccination, but also to use the vaccines we've got. Sarah Gilbert, who was one of the inventors of the AstraZeneca vaccine, she has been appealing to people to get the vaccination and to get the vaccines out to the rest of the world. So people that everybody can respect for their genius and for their scientific achievement, and people in the world of sport and so on, are appealing to people to get vaccination. I make that appeal today as well.
Let me ask you, as a former Prime Minister, while I've got you, you've seen this big argument that's developing between us and the French at the moment because they had done a deal with the Australians to have submarines, diesel-powered submarines, and we've gone behind their backs, the French would say, and done a deal with the Americans to provide them with nuclear submarines. Would you have done it in that way if you'd still been Prime Minister?
Well, I think we could have done it better, just as we could have done the Afghanistan exit a lot better. And I think there are lessons to learn. And I hope when Boris Johnson meets President Biden, they'll discuss how the whole of the West can work more closely together. But I think France also has an issue here. They want to, if you like, to have strategic autonomy in Europe. And so they will build this up as an argument against working just with NATO. They want a sort of French-led European defence capacity. So I think France has its own motives for building this up, but I think we've got to learn to work better together. There is a standoff with China at the moment. If the West cannot unite and say what it wants to see done, then I don't think we're going to be in a very strong position to influence world events. And America, and I think Boris Johnson should say this to Joe Biden tomorrow, America used to act unilaterally because it was a unipolar age and they had complete hegemony. Now we're in a multipolar age and they've got to work with other countries, and Britain and America's partnership is really important to that. So I hope on practical decisions that are made tomorrow when Boris Johnson meets President Biden, we can see the alliances working far better than they did in Afghanistan.
But how concerned are you that, our closest defence ally in the form of the French have withdrawn their ambassadors from Australia and also from the US and have pulled out of defence talks with the United Kingdom later on in the week? Now, they're French, they might be a little bit sulky about it, but they are our closest defence allies. We do need to work with them while organisations like the Americans are keeping an eye on what's happening in the Far East.
Yeah, well, as I've said, I think this is more to do with French domestic politics. I think President Macron is asserting the importance that he attaches to French involvement in the defence of the West and the defence of the world. And I think this will blow over pretty quickly, in my view. But what we've got to watch is that there's a split over time between the French wanting to take Europe one way and the Americans, Britain and NATO wanting to go another way. I think that's something.
We must leave it there, Mr. Brown. I'm so sorry we're out of time. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning.